It is 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you guys again for joining us today on this Tuesday. I'm seeing so many repeat names, and that makes me just so excited about our Louisiana educators and how committed you guys are to just professional growth, even during this time that's really meant for you to recharge and kind of reset, especially after like a challenging year like last year. So, I just want to thank y'all and celebrate you guys because, you guys are doing the hard work of educating our children, and I commend you for that. And I just want to say I was reading through again your reflection pieces in our slideshow at the beginning, and it's such an honor to just kind of read how you guys are going to apply some of this learning in your classroom. So definitely keep sharing those reflections so we can share them with your colleagues, because I think sometimes you may have this wonderful idea and you can live in South Louisiana and that might spark something for somebody in North Louisiana. And so that community, we're expanding that, our community. So I do appreciate that and thank you guys for that. Today, we're going to do session 3, which is our language comprehension session. This is one that I really like talking about because I think it's something not that we neglect, but as K-2 teachers or K-3 teachers, I think a lot of times like our focus is on the word recognition, but there's this equally important part in the language comprehension piece. And so I want to talk through that today and just really think about like what this might look like in our classrooms and how this can impact student reading learning. So just a quick introduction of myself in case this is your first time. My name is Sarah Solman. I am the K-2 Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. If you ever need to email me, and I have had some of you guys email me with some wonderful suggestions and questions, I always value and appreciate that, but you can do that by emailing me at sarah.stolman@louisiana.or.la.gov. You can also use our hashtags if you're a social media user and you really want to broaden the conversation. These are hashtags, hashtag Louisiana Literacy and hashtag Reading Revival. And if you want to go onto social media and search those hashtags, you can see what some of your colleagues are saying. So just a great way to kind of centralize our discussion and really, keep us all on board and keep us all talking with each other. I'm gonna move on here. Just as always, a little bit of housekeeping. We do have a large number of people participating in these webinars. So you could just make sure that your video is turned off and that you're muted. That would be very, very helpful. It'll just make sure that we don't have any bandwidth issues or connectivity issues or anything like that. If you have any questions or concerns, definitely submit those in the chat. And if you need any sort of accessibility, or if you have any accessibility needs, definitely reach out to us at lvoecommunications@la.gov, and we can take care of that for you because we want everybody to be able to participate. Okay, and just like I said, just like the last time we had 3 door prize winners, we also selected 3 door prize winners from our individuals who shared their reflections to our last Engage question. And so the following teachers are the winners of last session's door prizes. And so this is going to be another set of phonemic awareness activity cards that we will mail to you. So Janae Seville, Charlotte Reed, and Casey Verscher, come on down. I'm just kidding, but not really. Email me at sarah.stolman@la.gov. Send me your address and I'll mail you those. I'll put those cards in the mail right away. We'll have an Engage question at the end today. Don't forget to submit your reflections either through email or through Twitter, and we will enter you into our next drawing. So great job, guys. Okay. So in our last session, we spent time focusing on the word recognition strands of Scarborough's reading road. So in that, we were looking at phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. We were looking at word decoding, and we were looking at sight recognition. And we talked about all of those as being really important to help students identify and quickly read by sight the words that are on the printed page. Now, That doesn't mean we're teaching sight words, right? But through the process of instruction with decoding, students become able to read largely by sight. And that's our goal. We want students to be able to read at essentially the rate of spoken speech, which is about 200 words per minute. Thereabouts. If you talk faster, maybe a little faster than that. We also discussed how, like I said, phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition shape a student's ability to read with automaticity. And that's our goal, that automaticity. We want them to be able to read without having to think about it too much, right? We want them to really put their thought into the comprehension, understanding the meaning of what they're reading, not necessarily the decoding part. But you only get there through instruction in those things. So that's what we talked about in our last session. Today's objective is just a little bit different. By the end of today's session, you guys are going to be able to explain the role of language comprehension in developing skilled readers. And to that end, you're going to be able to explain how these things kind of factor into reading comprehension, background knowledge, that vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy or print knowledge. How do all of these things kind of weave together on that reading rope to lead to reading comprehension? Now, we're going to kind of go back to this rope. We had this same rope in our last session because this is really kind of a wonderful infographic to show kind of what's going on as students are learning to read. And at the earliest level, grade levels where we're teaching, where most of us are teaching, we see that language comprehension and word recognition are separated. Doesn't mean one is more important than the other. It just means that at one time, right, we're focusing on this word recognition side, but we also have to build their ability to understand language. Because as they become more proficient in their word reading, if we've built their ability to understand language in increasingly complex ways, they're going to be able to understand what they read in increasingly complex ways. You know, for those of you guys who might be pre-K or K or first grade teachers, you know firsthand that very often students can comprehend so much deeper, or text that is so much more deep or complex than what they're able to read on their own. You can do a read aloud and they can recall everything, make inferences, make connections, do all of those things on a text that you read to them, but they might not have the skill level yet with word recognition to read that same text. But the work that you're doing, they're building their language comprehension, is going to build their capacity to do that in increasingly strategic ways, so that when they are able to read those texts, they're going to be able to do it meaningfully, and they're going to be able to comprehend what they read. Now, when we talk about language comprehension, like I said earlier, we're talking about background knowledge, the facts, the concepts, things they know. Sometimes we might refer to this as their schema or schemata. Vocabulary, what is the level of which they understand the words that are in the text? You know, I read something interesting in preparation for this, but really to meaningfully understand something, we have to at a minimum know 90% of the words that we read. So if they don't know many of the words, they're going to struggle there. Language structures, and we're going to talk a little bit about this more in detail, but the syntax, right? Do they understand the grammatical structures of language or the semantics? Can they understand the meaning of a sentence such that it makes sense? Verbal reasoning. This can often be hard for some students. They might be great at the recall, but when you come and you ask them to infer or read between the lines or make sense of a metaphor, you know, or a deeper way to grapple with text, they might struggle there. And then we have literacy knowledge, our print concepts, genres, things of that nature. You know, do they know that words move from left to right? You know, maybe someone who moved from a culture where words are read right to left and from the bottom of the page to the top of the page may not know that, right? And that might be something where you have to kind of provide some instruction. Can they distinguish? Can they see the difference between a word and a letter? Things like that. Now, all of these skills are woven over time so that they become used strategically while reading, right? They know when it's appropriate to infer or they know when metaphors are being used, right? They're not reading everything just like a word caller and not really developing their understanding. They're simultaneously recognizing the words and understanding what they mean and putting them together to make sense of the text. Okay. So this is a big one. And I think this is one of my favorite ones to talk about because there's a lot of research around this idea of background knowledge. And probably some of the most famous research that you may have heard of is the work of E.D. Hirsch, right? And early on, I mean, and this is like in the early 1980s, E.D. Hirsch was really interested in why kids, even with similar abilities to decode, demonstrated differences in their ability to comprehend text. And as he dug deeper into it, what he found was that lower income students, even with similar levels of decoding ability, tended to struggle more with comprehension. So he dug around a little bit, and what he found was that differences in background knowledge directly impacted their ability to comprehend text. Now think about this with yourself, right? If you're reading an article about education or you're reading a book that's written for educators, you have a lot of schema, you have a lot of understanding and background. So you're going to be able to comprehend that text much more easily than someone who's never set foot in a school building since they graduated from high school, right? Because you have a lot of background knowledge. But then flip that around. If I gave you a medical journal, or if I read a medical journal, I'm going to struggle because I really don't understand anything about these words or what they're doing. I don't have that background knowledge. So even though I might be able to decode the words, I'm going to really struggle to comprehend that because I don't have that background knowledge. And in the same way, our students who have background knowledge in areas are able to comprehend text at a higher level than students who don't have background knowledge at that level. So one of our jobs as K-3 teachers or K-2 teachers is to really develop background knowledge in a comprehensive way. And one way that we do that is really by identifying these kind of key content areas and building their knowledge base around those. So, you might do a unit on astronomy, right? And you might select various complex texts to expose your children to read aloud to them. And as you move through those, you're going to be introducing vocabulary in the context of your read alouds, such that by the time you get into the second week or something, the kids are going to have a lot of background knowledge and they're going to be able to grapple with that text in a way that was very different when how you started, right? And then as they read about those topics, they're going to be able to read them with more purpose and more understanding because they do have that background knowledge. Now, in addition to having that background knowledge, they have to be able to activate it and readily access it. It's not just, I read this book 6 months ago on the universe, right? We want to do things in our class through repeated exposures that make it easier for them to activate and readily access that knowledge. Now, there was a very interesting study published very recently, which was suggested that a child with lower reading skill when it comes to word recognition can partially compensate for that with a higher degree of background knowledge. So think about your students. You have a little girl in your class and maybe she struggles with reading fluency and she's not super fluent, but then you give her a book about Barbie and she knows everything about Barbie. She knows that all of Barbie's sisters and Barbie's family and friends and everything that she has. She's going to be able to fill in some of those gaps because she has so much background knowledge about that. Now it is interesting, a caveat here is a lot of times that is really more about they're able to recall that information, but it becomes less significant when we're talking about really making inferences and thinking deeply about the text. So just to kind of keep that in mind. It doesn't mean we want to disregard word recognition, but we definitely want to recognize the importance of background knowledge. Building a broad base of knowledge with your students is a crucial component of good reading instruction. As you build their knowledge base, they're able to think about and write about many different topics. I've seen so often, like you may do a unit on the War of 1812 or something, and then the kids will be on the playground, somebody's pretending to be Dolly Madison, and you're like, wow, they really internalize this, and they're kind of applying it to their lives, because sometimes these stories are fun, but it's a wonderful, good, crucial component of good reading instruction. And many of our widely used curricula have a focus on building a wide knowledge base among students through read aloud, right? So sometimes I think we have a hard time, some of us might even have a hard time thinking about, why are we doing this unit on this, right? Maybe the War of 1812 or something like that. But when we think about, this is just an opportunity to build a wide knowledge base so that when they're exposed to similar content in the future, they're able to comprehend it more readily. So definitely reflect on that as you think about the lessons that you're teaching. Now, the next thread that I want to talk about is vocabulary. Now, vocabulary is key to reading comprehension, as you might expect. If a student does not know what the words mean, they're not going to be able to comprehend them. It's like speaking another language to them. If I ask you to sit while I spoke Mandarin to you, unless you're a fluent Mandarin speaker, you're not going to understand. But if I build your vocabulary and your understanding, then you are going to be able to understand. Now, one question I often get is, how do we teach vocabulary? Many years ago when I was in school, like the teacher would give us a list of vocabulary words, we had to write them 5 times and then go look them up in the dictionary and then write a sentence with the using the word appropriately. But most of the time, most vocabulary that we learn is learned indirectly through regular interactions and conversations. This is why a 2-year-old can kind of have a regular semi-regular conversation. We haven't given them instruction on each of those vocabulary words, but they've just kind of picked them up through context, through interactions with you. And most of our vocabulary, that tier 1 vocabulary that we, that everyday language that we use is learned indirectly. But some vocabulary has to be explicitly taught. There's some words that I could say that maybe you really have never heard before. You can't use the context to figure it out. It's not super applicable to your life. So we have to explicitly teach that, and that's okay. You can support learning of vocabulary indirectly by having students engage regularly in conversations with both peers and adults. Let them talk. That's one of the things I would, as an instructional coach and as a school administrator, I would always kind of guide my teachers to see is who's doing most of the talking. And if it's you need to step back, right? The students really should be doing most of the talking. It gives them an opportunity to practice those vocabulary words. Read alouds are wonderful. And also through independent reading. These are all opportunities for them to learn how to learn vocabulary indirectly. Now, when it comes to direct instruction in vocabulary, there are some things that we can do to support that, right? One is we can promote word consciousness. And I think about this even a lot with myself. Like if I'm reading something and I don't know what a word means, so I just kind of gloss over it, or do I stop myself and say, no, I need to understand what this word means, right? And we want to encourage our students to do that, to stop themselves, to ask questions when they don't understand the word. If you're doing a read aloud, like a great thing for you to model as you're doing a read aloud is to say, hey, I don't understand this word. Let me see how I can figure it out. And then do like a think aloud of your process for how you would do it. But really model that when you don't understand something, stop and ask a question about it, right? Become word conscious. If you don't know something, figure it out. Teach word meaning directly. If you have, if you're doing a unit on westward expansion, right? And you're exposing the children to the word pioneer, that might be a very difficult word for them to understand just through context or normal conversation. So you can give a little quick lesson on what that word means. Share with them what a pioneer is, give them an opportunity to practice it and then move on. And then teach them independent word learning strategies, including those use of context clues, because that's something that we might do. The use of word parts, so morphology, like look at prefixes and suffixes and things of that nature. And then the efficient use of the dictionary, because sometimes you just cannot figure out what a word is, and you'll go straight to the dictionary. I know I do that myself a lot, and I think it's okay to model that for your students. If you don't know what a word is, go to the dictionary or ask. But that's, again, part of that idea of word consciousness, right? Getting them aware that you know most of the words, but sometimes you don't. So you have to figure out what that word means. Then we come to language structures, okay? So this is that third strand. And so good language comprehension also requires an awareness of and skill with syntax. And so syntax are really those grammatical structures of text that help common users of language understand how we organize words so that they make sense, right? I mean, the best example of this is like in English, if we're using a modifier, in English, our modifiers tend to come first. So if I say the red truck, that's syntactically correct because in English, we tend to put our modifiers first. Now in Spanish, they would put their modifiers after. So it would be the truck red, right? So syntactically, if you have an English language learner, it might feel more natural for them to say the truck red, right? But we have to build that understanding of the way that our syntax works, because that will help them comprehend more meaningfully. Now, syntactic awareness refers to the ability to monitor the relationships among the words in a sentence in order to understand while reading or composing orally and writing. And that poor syntactic awareness is going to negatively impact reading comprehension. And just like I said earlier, I mean, that's particularly the case for oftentimes English language learners, right? They might have different syntactic patterns in their language. I know with me, like with Spanish, like oftentimes if I'm trying to communicate something in Spanish, I'm trying to syntactically, when I'm translating in my head, I'm trying to syntactically align it with English, but it doesn't always work that way. So my syntax in Spanish might be weak, whereas the reverse may be the case for someone who's learning English. So it's something for you to think about. One more thing about language structures too. We also talk about semantics, right? And semantics is more about the meaning of the sentence or the study of the meaning of sentences, right? So if I asked you, does this make sense? The slow rabbit chased the dog through the field. Well, syntactically, that might be okay. I mean, everything kind of works grammatically. But when I think about, does that sentence make sense? Not really. Like, why would a slow rabbit be chasing a dog through a field? Like, semantically, it would make more sense that the dog was chasing the rabbit through the field. So even though something might be syntactically correct, it might not be semantically correct. And we have to look at our students and see where is that breakdown. And it might be there. Like semantics is a great place to kind of see if there's a comprehension breakdown. Because sometimes they're not drawing those conclusions the right way. And looking at it at the sentence level is a great way to start. So if you have a kid who's struggling with comprehension, taking a sentence like that, that's not necessarily semantically correct, and talking through it with them, like, and asking them to explain, like, does this make sense? How could we make this make sense? Why doesn't it make sense? Get them to do that talking. It's going to force them to start thinking about that as they read on their own, and that's going to support their reading comprehension. Don't give them 2 pages. Start at that sentence level, because that's really going to help them with their semantic understandings, and definitely going to push their ability to comprehend what they read. Another thing that we're going to look at when it comes to these things, when it comes to language comprehension, is their ability to engage in verbal reasoning, right? Verbal reasoning refers to understanding what you read by making connections to what you already know, inferencing, understanding metaphors, and being able to draw conclusions from text, right? So you're thinking deeply about what the text is about, making connections to other texts that they've read, inferring things that aren't written explicitly in the text. And this can be a struggle for students, especially K-1, 2 students, right? And this might be something that we have to work on. And again, like some of those semantic lessons that I was talking about before could support this too, right? Just start at the very basic sentence level and try to push them to think, ask them to infer or to think about what this might mean. For English language learners who might not be familiar with the idioms that we have in our language, or metaphors or things like that, you might have to provide explicit instruction there. If you know that you're going to do a read aloud that is filled with idioms or is filled with metaphors, tell that student before you do the read aloud, front load them with that information, because that's going to allow them to more meaningfully engage with the text. That's not cheating. That's an appropriate scaffold, right? That's the support that they need, because they don't have the luxury of necessarily having speaking English at home, So think about that and support them in making those connections between texts. And then the last one that we get to is literacy and print knowledge. Now, this oftentimes, like I was a kindergarten teacher for a long time, and this is something we work with a lot at the beginning of kindergarten. But you might have a 1st or 2nd grade student who does not have this understanding. But we're asking, does a student have an awareness of print concepts? Do they know that the text moves from left to right, that there are spaces between words, that new paragraphs begin on separate lines? Do they understand that letters on the page represent spoken language?
Do not start your video because the host has stopped it, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna mute somebody. But okay. Do they have that? Do they understand, this is fiction or this is nonfiction? Can I ask everyone to mute themselves? Thank you. Okay. Do they understand that this is fiction or nonfiction? Can they distinguish between those? Do they understand the author's purpose for writing? If there's a breakdown there, there's going to be a breakdown in that language comprehension side too. So definitely something that you want to work with. But just like with all of these, this rope is such a great model for you to identify where breakdowns may happen, right? Now, they may be really fluent word collars, and this is something I would work with my teachers a lot, right? Like the student could read, but then when we gave them some questions about the test, they couldn't answer anything, right? Because they become really proficient decoders, but they weren't slowing down. And a lot of times, with like fluency, like my teachers would often be, my teachers would often, oftentimes my teachers would be pushing them to read fast. And I would be like, okay, the goal is never to read fast. We're only concerned with fluency as it's predictive of their ability to more deeply comprehend the text. So if they may be reading, 150 words correct per minute, but they can't remember anything about the text, we're going to slow it down and we're going to start to do some of those, some of that comprehension work, because that's where the breakdown is. And if you're doing read alouds and they're not understanding, you're going to want to do more work there. So definitely as a teacher, be thinking about those things, because that'll really help you diagnose where issues are. So just my final thoughts here as we wrap up. Language comprehension is as important as word recognition in developing skilled readers, but it's often a neglected component, particularly at the earliest levels. I think rightfully we start thinking, oh, we have to teach them, to recognize these words and to decode these words. That is so important. But there's another strand that's equally important, and that's that language comprehension piece. And for you as a teacher, understanding if and where a child is struggling when it comes to language comprehension is going to help you support their growth. Things like read alouds, conversations, and opportunities to learn and express their thinking are key for building a child's ability to comprehend language. Let them talk, I said it I feel like I said it a million times, but really reflect on and I said it to myself as a teacher too, right? Who's doing the talking? And really you want them doing the talking, and you want them doing the majority of the talking, because as they start to use those words and understand those words, they're gonna, their ability to understand conversation and participate meaningfully in it is going to increase, and that's going to pay dividends for their reading comprehension. So keep that in mind, and use that as a reflection piece for yourself as a teacher. Now, we've come to our question, our engaged question. And our question today is, why are the language comprehension strands of Scarborough's reading rope essential for developing skilled readers? What are you going to do to support your students' ability to understand increasingly complex language? So you can either email your responses to me at sarah.stolman@le.gov. So thank you to everybody who has been doing that. It's amazing. Or tweet them using the hashtag Louisiana Literacy and Reading Revival by 5 o'clock tonight. And then we'll enter you into the drawing for door prizes, and you'll be shouted out in our upcoming PB sessions. So make sure to come a few minutes early if you want to read some of your colleagues' thoughts, because that's what we've been kind of cycling through. I'm going to have one of my colleagues post this engaged question in the chat. And I also want to encourage you guys to please just take a minute to offer some session feedback. We appreciate all the feedback that we get from you guys, and it helps us make this more appropriate and more beneficial for y'all. So thank y'all so much for coming. You guys are amazing. We have the best teachers in the state of Louisiana, and I'm just happy to be here to offer this session to you guys. And I hope to see y'all tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. right here in this room. And yeah, can't wait to read your reflections. Thank you for joining us. Bye.